He leaned in, smirking, and said I couldn't afford class. I smiled, finished my water, and signed the clipboard. An hour later, when the bill landed and the lights dimmed, his guests learned exactly who paid for their perfect night. Before watching the video, please tell us in the comments from where you are watching this video. The ballroom smelled like polished marble and champagne. Gold-trimmed menus sat neatly folded beside plates that probably cost more than my first car. A charity auction for urban revitalization, Trevor Langford's latest vanity project. He'd built the event around his name, his logo, his photo printed in the welcome brochure. The words, "Hosted by the Langford Foundation," gleamed in bold across every screen. I wasn't supposed to be there as a guest of honor. I came because my younger sister Brooke's hospital had been promised a donation from Trevor's campaign. She asked me to come as her +1 for support. She thought the gala would be fun, glamorous, maybe even meaningful. She underestimated how arrogance can fill a room faster than perfume. Trevor spotted me near the bar before I saw him. He was one of those men who shook hands like he owned the air between you. Tall, tan, suit tailored to suggest money without needing taste. "Aaron Pike," he said, remembering my name only because I'd once installed hardwood floors in one of his show homes. "Didn't think I'd see you at one of these things." "Supportive brother duties," I said. "Brooke works at Mercy General." "Right," he said, eyes flicking to my shoes, then my collar. "Well, enjoy the night. Try the lamb skewers, they're not cheap." I smiled politely, let the jab hang there, and moved on. The gala rolled like every other wealthy social event. Smooth music, overpriced wine, conversations practiced in mirrors. Brooke floated through the crowd, radiant and a little nervous. She didn't notice Trevor's glances or his subtle smirks aimed my way, but I did. I'd seen his kind on construction sites, men who wear success like armor and need someone else smaller to confirm it fits. Dinner began at 7. The MC, an upbeat voice hired to charm donors, introduced Trevor with applause so loud it bordered on scripted. He took the stage, thanked sponsors, and talked about restoring dignity to communities. The irony wasn't lost on me. He didn't know dignity wasn't something you could sponsor. It was something you could only live with. After the speeches, guests wandered toward the auction tables. Paintings, jewelry, a private vineyard tour package, all donated for exposure. I stood by the exit, watching Brooke chat with hospital staff. Trevor's voice cut through the music again as he laughed with a cluster of donors. "You have to understand," he said loud enough for the nearby servers to hear. "Some people just don't get refinement. It's not about money, it's breeding." I looked over just in time for him to glance my way, grin crooked, and say, "Like my friend Aaron here, salt of the earth, good hands, just not class material." The group laughed lightly, unsure whether to follow his tone or hide discomfort. I didn't react. I'd learned long ago that silence unsettles bullies faster than words. Brooke turned, catching fragments of the remark, her face tightening. I shook my head slightly, telling her to let it go. But inside, the insult carved deep, not because it was cruel, but because it was lazy. Trevor believed wealth could purchase class, yet his manners proved he'd never earned either. The evening dragged toward its closing auction. Mia Hart, the event planner, moved briskly between tables, checking clipboards, whispering to staff. I'd met her earlier when Brooke introduced us. Sharp eyes, calm voice, professional to the bone. She reminded me of people who fix problems before anyone else sees them. As she passed by, Trevor snapped his fingers to get her attention. "Miss Hart," he called, "the lighting is too warm. Can we make it more exclusive?" She nodded once, hiding her annoyance. I caught her eye briefly, and she rolled them so subtly only someone trained in patience would notice. She mouthed, "He's impossible." When dessert arrived, I stepped out to the terrace. City lights stretched across the skyline, a map of stories no one in that ballroom cared about. My phone buzzed. A message from a vendor I knew from my contracting days. "Hey, you ever work with Langford Group? They still owe me for an install last month. Avoid 'em." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked back through the glass doors at Trevor, shaking hands and posing for another photo. A man who bragged about class but didn't pay the people who built it for him. Brooke joined me outside. "He's awful," she said quietly. "Why'd you even stay after that comment?" "Because I wanted to hear how his night ends," I said. She frowned. "Please don't do anything." "I won't," I said, finishing my water. "He will." Inside, the band struck its final song. Servers began clearing plates. Trevor stood near the podium again, soaking in the applause as if it were oxygen. I slipped past him toward the catering desk, where Mia was signing invoices. "Rough night?" I asked. She smiled tiredly. "You have no idea." "Actually," I said, "I might. How's he paying for all this?" "Langford Foundation, technically," she replied. "Though between us the deposit was short. He promised the rest after the event." I raised an eyebrow. "And if he doesn't?" "Then the hotel eats the loss," she said, shrugging. "That's why they asked for an escrow next time." I nodded slowly. The idea took shape right then, quiet, sharp, and perfectly legal. If Trevor believed money defined class, I'd let him find out who really owned his evening. I thanked her, shook her hand, and told her we might talk soon. When I left the ballroom, Trevor was mid-toast, his laugh echoing through chandeliers. He looked unstoppable, but I'd built enough structures to know anything that loud hides a weak beam somewhere. All you have to do is tap it the right way. I started on job sites where mornings smelled like dust and diesel. My hands learned weight before they learned numbers. A tape measure felt like a second spine along my belt. I framed walls, hung doors, and listened more than I spoke. Old carpenters taught me to keep quiet and cut straight. They said progress sounds like hammers, not speeches. I believed them, and the belief paid bills faithfully. When the housing crash came, I bought small and held longer. Rent checks beat applause because rent doesn't clap and then disappear. That's how a contractor became an investor without changing clothes. Money didn't change my taste or my weekends. I still ate at diners where the coffee is honest. I still fixed leaky traps for neighbors because dignity travels both ways. Brooke teased me that I hoarded screws like a dragon. I told her good hardware saves marriages faster than counseling. She laughed and said I should write that on a t-shirt. She's a nurse who knows tired eyes and hard nights. Her world doesn't have velvet ropes or director's chairs. When her hospital hoped for Trevor's donation, she believed the brochures shine. I believe numbers, so I read the fine print twice. Trevor and I met years ago when class meant crown molding. He hired my crew for a showcase townhome off Riverside. The budget looked generous until the 5th urgent change order. He wanted statement pieces that ignored physics and invoices. I explained span, load, and the math holding ceilings above heads. He smirked like gravity answered to his brand deck. He slow-walked final payment and called it cash flow choreography. I called the lien office and filed quietly. He paid 2 days later and called me predictable. I remembered his handshake and the way he scanned room labels like mirrors. He wore confidence like cologne and left the same headache behind. I never envied people like him. I audited them. I checked whether generosity matched receipts. I watched if they queued or cut lines when nobody looked. Class to me was the bus driver who waited for a runner. It was the server who refilled waters before you asked. It was my foreman, Deke, who sent overtime home to his mom. Those people carried dignity like weight plates, not balloons. Trevor carried it like a rented tux and tripped on the hem. When he told me I couldn't afford class, I measured faster. Not revenge yet, just distance between noise and structural truth. Structural truth always wins because it doesn't need a microphone. Brooke knew the Gala crowd better than I did. "They chase donors the way we chase respirators," she said, "but sometimes the money saves lives." I asked how much her unit expected this year. She quoted a number that translated to monitors and beds. Trevor's foundation promised half before Thanksgiving, publicly and loudly. I asked whether any money had arrived since the announcement. She frowned and said promises were processing, a word with too many exits. I decided to attend because numbers felt slippery. She squeezed my arm and told me not to bring a toolbox. "Just wear a jacket and behave," she said, smiling. I promised I would, and I meant the jacket part. Mia Hart entered the story like good hardware, small, strong, and dependable. Event planners see everything and admit very little. She spoke in clean clauses and used names precisely. Her staff moved like a stage crew that respects gravity. I noticed she checked with kitchen, AV, and floor captains equally. That balance said integrity lives behind curtains, not just under spotlights. When Trevor snapped for exclusive lighting, she adjusted without flinching. When he bragged about silent benefactors, her eyebrow flicked 1 millimeter. People who manage chaos learn to measure in quiet units. I clocked her as a potential ally before I knew the plan. Allies like that don't shout, they verify. My investing rulebook is short and stained with coffee. Rule 1, buy boring places on streets that sleep well. Rule 2, Know the superintendent's kid's favorite cereal. Rule 3. Keep cash for storms, not applause. That rule bought duplexes after a thunderhead summer. It taught me escrow is a safety rail, not a drama prop. I used escrow whenever contractors needed shielded payments. It prevented egos from dragging checks through parties. So when Mia mentioned short deposit and post-event promises, I heard hinges squeak. If he'd underfunded the night, someone would eat the overflow. If the hotel paid vendors first, someone held the bill last. I don't like bullies, but I hate unpaid crews more. The city taught me one additional rule. Leadership reads the ledger personally. Victor Ames, the general manager, had that reputation. He wasn't glamorous. He was punctual and exact. He respected a signed agreement like a firefighter respects oxygen. I'd met him once during a charity breakfast, the unglossy kind. He'd thanked volunteers by name and remembered allergies long after. People like Victor make institutions feel human under chandeliers. They also understand the difference between donation and theater. If I needed a doorway into policy, he was the hinge. Hinges are small, but doors don't swing without them. Trevor would never see the hinge. He only sees mirrors. I thought about dignity the whole drive home after the gala. My truck still smelled like cut pine and old leather. The skyline reflected off the hood in clean, straight lines. I replayed Trevor's smirk and Brooke's worried face. I replayed Mia's careful words about deposits and timing. Most people think revenge requires flame and witnesses. Real revenge requires receipts and good timing. It looks like correction that refuses to hide. It sounds like an announcement everyone can verify later. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted gravity to show up on time. Gravity is patient until you pretend it doesn't exist. At my kitchen table, I sketched a simple diagram. 3 boxes, hotel, planner, foundation. Arrows showed promises going one way and invoices another. I drew a 4th box labeled Benefactor Anonymous. Beneath it I wrote, escrow covers venue, AV, gratuities. Acknowledgment clause required. The note felt clean, almost elegant in its plainness. If I underwrote the night quietly, facts would surface politely. The clause would speak without naming a soul. The emcee would read it because scripts beat ad-libs in crises. Trevor wouldn't be accused, he would be eclipsed. Eclipses don't shout, they just change the room's light. Before sleep, I called Brooke and kept it simple. If the hospital gets the funds, that's what matters, I said. But if someone plays games with the truth, we'll fix the lighting. She asked what that meant and laughed at her own pun. I told her to rest and let me handle the math. She said she trusted my math more than anyone's charm. That compliment felt heavier than the insult that started this. Tomorrow, I'd call Victor and meet Mia on neutral ground. Tomorrow, I'd move numbers where applause couldn't reach them. Quiet doesn't mean weak, it means ready. The next morning, I stopped by the hotel where the gala had been held. Victor Ames met me in his office. Everything about him precise. Pressed cuffs, tidy desk, clock 5 minutes fast. He shook my hand firmly, but not to impress. Mr. Pike, Mia said you might drop by, he said. You had some questions about last night's event? I'm curious about outstanding balances, I said plainly. Strictly business curiosity. Victor adjusted his glasses and tapped a folder. The Langford Foundation event was beautiful, but the payment schedule was flexible. The deposit covered half the room fee. The remainder was due upon invoice, which hasn't cleared. How long before it becomes a problem? I asked. 72 hours before penalties, he said. And our vendors don't like waiting. They're small outfits. Lighting techs, servers, florists. I nodded. People with families and rent. He studied me for a moment. Why do I get the sense you're not just curious? Because I've been on their side, I said. And I can help if you let me. Victor leaned back slightly. Go on. I outlined what I knew. Trevor's reputation for delayed payments, his need for image control, and the fact that he'd built a brand on borrowed polish. Victor listened without interruption, the way good managers do when they're quietly testing your character. When I finished, he asked the one question that mattered. Why intervene? I smiled faintly. Because people like him think class can't exist below the top floor. I'd like to remind him otherwise. Victor's mouth twitched, the closest he got to a grin. And how do you plan to do that? With receipts, I said, and leverage. He looked interested now. If you're proposing to cover the balance, that's generous. But I can't accept personal payments on someone else's contract. You wouldn't be, I replied. You'd process it as an anonymous benefactor through the event's escrow. Standard clause, standard confidentiality. You'll get your money, your staff will get paid. The name stays sealed until acknowledged on record. He raised an eyebrow. You've done this before. Construction sites teach you creative accounting, I said. Legal, but creative. He nodded slowly, then opened his calendar. If I allow this, what's your endgame? Nothing public, I said. Just truth delivered politely. He considered it. I'll draft a provisional escrow contract. You'll need Mia's cooperation. I already have it, I said. That afternoon, I met Mia in a quiet corner booth at a downtown cafe. She had a laptop, 2 cappuccinos, and the expression of someone who already guessed why she was there. Let me guess, she said. You want to make sure the vendors get paid. Exactly, I said, but we'll do it quietly. She exhaled with relief. They're panicking. Trevor's foundation promised wire transfers this week, but there's no trace. How much? She showed me a spreadsheet. Tens of thousands spread across caterers, lighting, and rentals. I glanced through it, doing mental math. It wasn't ruinous for me, but it was enough to sting Trevor's pride if he knew. I can move funds today, I said. You'll process it through escrow and close the accounts. And when the donors ask who paid, she asked carefully. That's the beauty of the clause, I said. You'll call it an anonymous benefactor per contract, but the emcee's script will require acknowledgment of that benefactor during the next event. Her eyes narrowed slightly, impressed. You're using his favorite trick, optics. Exactly, I said. We'll let the truth do its own PR. Mia smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since the gala. I like your kind of class, Mr. Pike. That night, I reviewed my accounts and wired the amount into the escrow holding line Victor had provided. When I signed the final authorization, the system pinged. Transfer complete. Numbers shifted, balances equalized, and my quiet investment bought every invoice their piece. I called Brooke afterward. She was still at the hospital, voice soft from exhaustion. How's the good fight? I asked. Another double shift, she said. And you? Just paying some bills that weren't mine, I said. She groaned. Aaron, please don't tell me this has to do with that jerk from the gala. It has to do with fairness, I said. And lighting. Lighting? You'll see, I said, smiling. The next day, Mia confirmed the receipts cleared, and every vendor got their deposit alerts. They're thrilled, she said. And the hotel just sent Langford Foundation the official acknowledgement request, meaning Trevor will find out someone covered his bill, I said. Exactly, she said. He'll either admit it or double down. He'll double down, I said. Men like him always do. 2 nights later, the fallout began. A hotel accountant emailed the Langford Foundation politely, CCing Mia and Victor. Outstanding balance settled via escrow contribution. Please confirm acknowledgement clause compliance for donor recognition. Trevor responded within an hour. No outside benefactors were authorized. Please correct your record immediately. Mia forwarded me the thread with a single line. Here we go. I laughed quietly in my kitchen. Trevor had taken the bait. His ego couldn't tolerate the idea that someone had rescued his reputation, but by denying it, he'd open a door I could walk through cleanly. 3 days later, the hotel prepared for a follow-up dinner, a sponsor appreciation event Trevor insisted on hosting. He needed another spotlight, another microphone to drown the growing whispers about the payment dispute. His assistant called everyone back with polite urgency. Mia sent me the new program draft. He's doubling down, she said. He's going to thank our generous team at Langford Foundation for settling every cost. I smiled. Perfect. That's when the clause speaks. Mia looked puzzled. I interrupted. When the room hears who really paid for class. Victor's email arrived first thing Monday morning. The subject line read, Provisional escrow terms, confidential. Attached was a clean 3-page agreement, the kind written by someone who values commas as much as signatures. The wording left no cracks. The donor would remain anonymous unless the event host publicly misrepresented payment, at which point acknowledgement became mandatory under the hotel's disclosure policy. I read it twice, slow and deliberate. The precision made me smile. Legal dignity, my favorite kind. I met Victor at his office after lunch. He poured black coffee into small hotel mugs and gestured toward the window overlooking the ballroom floor. Workers below dismantled chandeliers and folded linens, a quiet symphony of cleanup. You're sure about this? He asked. The balance is substantial. I've been sure since he said I couldn't afford class, I replied. Sometimes correction needs a receipt. He nodded, tapping the folder. Once this posts, it's irreversible. You'll be listed internally as the escrow principal, but only I and our controller will see it. If Mr. Langford claims full payment, the acknowledgment clause triggers automatically. Good, I said. Truth deserves an audience eventually. Victor smiled faintly. I'll have Mia coordinate signatures and timing. When I met Mia later that day, she had the documents printed and color-coded. You don't do things halfway, do you? She asked. Halfway projects collapse, I said. Ask any carpenter. She slid the forms across the table. Initial here for anonymity waiver, here for payment authorization, and here for disclosure conditions. I signed all three, the pen gliding with quiet satisfaction. My name would stay buried in records unless Trevor lied in public. If he did, and I knew he would, truth would surface like tide against stone. The transaction cleared at 4:37 p.m. Victor called to confirm. Balance received. Vendors cleared. Event ledger closed. I thanked him and stood by my window for a long minute, watching sunlight fade over the skyline. Somewhere across town, Trevor probably raised a glass to himself, unaware that his entire illusion now sat on my balance sheet. Class wasn't about who could pay. It was about who already had and didn't need to brag about it. 2 days later, Mia called to say the hotel's legal team finalized the paperwork. The clause is official, she said. If Trevor so much as implies full payment, the acknowledgement activates automatically. I asked how that worked in practice. The hotel's master of ceremonies reads a disclosure line at the next event. Standard compliance language, she explained. Basically, it'll sound like gratitude, not a slap. That's the best kind, I said. She chuckled. You know, I've planned over 100 events, but no one's ever used courtesy as a weapon before. It's a good one, I said. Silent, legal, and hard to argue with. We met that afternoon in the ballroom where it had all started. Without lights or laughter, the place looked smaller, more honest. Tables stood bare, floors shone under utility bulbs. Mia walked me through logistics for the follow-up dinner, Trevor's new showpiece, set for Friday night. He's calling it an appreciation event, she said, mostly to repair his reputation. He's invited the same donors, same staff. I looked around at the empty room and felt the weight of symmetry. Good, I said. The stage will remember him. Mia handed me a thin folder marked Donor Acknowledgement Addendum. This is the clause, she said. I read the single paragraph aloud. This event is made possible by the collective contributions of our sponsors and an anonymous benefactor whose support ensured completion of all vendor obligations. We extend our appreciation to all parties who upheld the highest standard of integrity and generosity. Perfect. Balanced tone. Undeniable subtext. Victor joined us near the podium. It reads well, he said. Subtle but airtight. If he contests it, we release the escrow statement. Let's hope he talks first, I replied. He smiled. He will. As I left, I paused under the crystal chandelier that had gleamed over his insult days earlier. Workers polished it quietly, unaware of what that room was about to witness. I thought about the irony, how the same light that flatters arrogance also exposes it when the angle changes. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The rehearsal felt like a dress parade for Trevor's ego, not gratitude. Staff lined the room while he paced the aisle, rehearsing charm like lines. He corrected a server's posture and called it brand experience with a grin. Mia stood near the podium, calm but clearly counting exit routes inside. Victor watched from the back with a manager's stillness that reads everything. The emcee tested his mic, then waited for cues without crowding anyone. Brooke arrived late from the hospital, scrubs swapped for a simple black dress. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Please don't poke the bear tonight." I promised patience because patience now had teeth. The chandelier above us looked like a witness, polished and impartial. Trevor opened with a practice welcome, loud enough to wake the crystal. "We at Langford Foundation settle our commitments before we sleep," he boomed. The line echoed hard against the empty room's honesty. Mia didn't flinch, but her pen paused mid-note for one beat. Victor checked the program quietly and met my eyes for half a second. Trevor waved the MC closer and added, "Emphasize our team's full coverage of vendor costs." The MC said, "We have a standard acknowledgement line from the hotel." Trevor frowned and asked, "Which line would that be exactly?" Victor stepped forward and replied, "The one that thanks sponsors and an anonymous benefactor." Trevor laughed and called it redundant. "Not redundant," Victor said, steady but immovable as a leveled beam. Trevor's smile cooled as he turned toward Mia for reinforcement. "We don't want confusion," he said, "so let's keep it simple tonight." Mia answered evenly, "Simple is fine." Accurate is required. He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he refused to learn. Are you implying we didn't pay our bills? He asked, voice slipping from velvet to glass. I'm confirming integrity language, she replied like a pilot reading instruments aloud. Trevor wagged a finger at the MC and said, cut that benefactor bit completely. Victor stepped closer, voice quiet but final. The hotel's policy won't permit that alteration. Brooke leaned in and whispered, he's going to explode. I kept my eyes forward and said, explosions hate room temperature facts. Trevor tried a new route, calling Charm back to the stage with a snap. Let's find compromise, he said. I'll personally thank vendors by name on stage. Mia nodded and said, do that and the acknowledgment stays as written. He smirked and replied, then I'll thank our foundation for paying them. Victor shook his head once. Small and absolute. Trevor muttered, this is ridiculous, and stalked toward the lighting board like a director. The AV tech stiffened as Trevor reached for switches like he owned them. Step back, sir, the tech said, polite but firm as rebar. Trevor turned that irritation toward easy targets because bullies follow gravity downhill. He told servers to smile wider and to carry with confidence, not cafeteria. A young server stumbled, cheeks flushing under the attention's heat. Brooke moved before I did, intercepting with a nurse's quick authority. He's carrying 10 plates, she said. You carry one sentence without dropping it. The staff smothered grins while Trevor recalibrated his charm slowly. He looked Brooke over and said, and you are? She answered, a nurse who cleans up messes your press releases can't. He forced a laugh and told Victor he wanted stricter service standards tonight. Victor replied, my standard is respect, Mr. Langford. The MC asked to run the closing segment once, clean and complete. Trevor hovered, waiting to snip words like hedges into his shapes. The MC lifted his script and read the acknowledgment exactly as submitted. This evening is made possible by sponsors and an anonymous benefactor who ensured every obligation was honored, he said. The room held its breath in that thin second after truth lands. Trevor clapped once, sharp as a gavel, and said, fine, keep it, but bury it. Mia said, it will be centered. That's the agreement. He rolled his shoulders like anger needed somewhere to live. Then I'll add my own closing, he said, and set the record straight. I said, records love numbers. He ignored me and rehearsed a smile in midair. During a short break, Brooke pulled me behind a column and searched my face. Please don't escalate, she said. You already won more than you think. I told her winning wasn't the point. Accuracy was oxygen. He suffocates people with image, I said. We're opening a window, not starting a fire. She nodded, the tightness leaving her shoulders by inches. If he calls you out, walk, she said. Make him argue with silence instead. I promised to let the room do the talking once the line landed. She squeezed my hand again and whispered, I hate men like him. I answered, he's not the room. The room is everyone he overlooks. Trevor returned with a second script, printed fresh and unapproved. He waved it like a flag for a nation of one. Final revision, he announced, crediting our foundation's complete financial stewardship. Victor took the page and folded it without reading further. That language is inaccurate, he said plainly, and it won't be used. Trevor stepped closer, voice dropping to a threat's temperature. Whose ballroom is this? He asked. Victor answered, mine. Whose ledger balanced it? Trevor hesitated, eyes cutting toward Mia, then toward me. I gave him nothing but a steady gaze that refused his mirror. He scoffed and said, whatever, just keep it elegant. The chandelier gave a soft chime, like glass agreeing with gravity. The rehearsal ended not with applause, but with limits acknowledged in the air. Morning broke clear, like the city was holding its breath for us. Mia called first, voice brisk and bright with purpose. Vendors confirmed deposits, she said. They're grateful and suddenly very loyal. I asked if anyone mentioned Trevor's delays directly. Not on record, she answered, but they remember who steadied the table. Brooke texted a heart and a warning to stay kind. I told her kindness and steel share the same spine. Victor sent a short message that sounded like a gavel tap. Policy stands, he wrote. Disclosure line is locked. I felt the plan click like a well-set hinge. By noon, I walked the hotel corridor and watched staff roll carts. Their faces showed the relief of people who would actually be paid. Mia met me near the service entrance with a practiced calm. MC rehearsed the acknowledgement again, she said softly. He understands the weight. I asked about Trevor's mood. and watched her eyes answer first. "He's charming with donors and sharp with everyone else," she said. "He's trying to force a rewrite by momentum." Victor appeared, tie straight, steps measured, posture like a rulebook. "We'll keep the floor even," he said. "Let gravity work tonight." I nodded because gravity never misses a shift. We reviewed the timeline in plain language, not theater. Guests at 6, welcome at 7, auction highlights trimmed to 20 minutes. The acknowledgment would land after dessert and before Trevor's closing vision. Mia said, "That placement ensures attention and prevents him from burying it." Victor added, "If he disputes it live, the controller releases the escrow statement." I said we should aim to avoid spectacle and protect Brooks Hospital. "Quiet correction," I said, "not public punishment." Mia sighed, relieved to hear the boundary again. "You're not like most people who intervene," she said. I told her carpenters hate messy endings. We prefer clean lines. Brooke arrived after shift change, hair pulled back, dressed simple and strong. She hugged me and studied my face for cracks. "You good?" she asked, reading my quiet like a chart. "Good enough," I said, giving her a small smile. She glanced around the ballroom, now dressed again in silver and glass. "Feels calmer," she said, and I agreed. Trevor strode in with donors orbiting like small moons. He shook hands, posed lightly, and performed care like it paid overtime. He saw us and nodded, eyes sliding, over me like a showroom finish. "Welcome, team," he called to the room. "Tonight we celebrate full stewardship." Victor's jaw set, and Mia wrote one small note. The AV lead, a stocky tech with precise hands, checked the mic. He looked at me and said, "Thanks for whatever you did." I told him people who lift trust deserve respect and receipts. He chuckled and returned to his board, professional and steady. Mia introduced me to the head server, a woman named Renee with eyes like rulers. "We appreciate the timing," Renee said quietly. "Weekends are rent." I said timing is half of grace and meant every word. Brooke touched my sleeve and whispered, "This feels like a hospital before rounds." I smiled. "Rounds with a chandelier," I said. She laughed, tension loosening one notch. An hour from doors, Trevor cornered Victor with a fixed smile. "I want my closer to run long," he said. "We need momentum." Victor answered with the care of a man diffusing a fuse. "Your closer is scheduled, but the acknowledgment sits where it belongs." Trevor leaned in, voice dipped in sugar and threat. "You're making a policy problem into a personality problem." Victor held eye contact and said, "Policy protects the people you invited." Mia stepped between them, calm like a lighthouse. "Let the program do its work," she said. Trevor pulled back with a laugh that never reached his eyes. "Fine," he said. "We'll play it your way." I knew that sentence always hides a second plan. I walked the terrace to steady my breathing and count anchors. The skyline spread clean, like a blueprint you could trust. Brooke joined me with 2 waters and a look that softened edges. "If he swings at you, don't swing back," she said. "Let the room notice. I promise to speak only in facts and gratitude." She nodded and leaned on the rail, shoulders finally level. "You know," she added, "class looks like paying people on time." I said class also sounds like a nurse telling a billionaire to wait. She laughed and bumped my arm lightly. Inside, the band warmed up a clean, low groove. Doors opened and the room filled with perfume, cufflinks, and murmurs. Donors found their places like marbles settling into grooves. The MC greeted guests with a professional smile and a teacher's rhythm. "We'll keep this crisp," he said off mic, "and we'll keep it fair." He folded the script and looked at me once, a nod like a pact. Mia checked the clock and gave the AV lead a small circle with her finger. Lights shifted to a soft focus that made silverware glow. Renee's team moved like a choreographed crew that respected timing. Victor stood behind the last row, hands clasped, posture saying policy could breathe. Dinner landed clean, and the room eased into applause. Trevor rose for mid-program remarks and turned the charm to full. He praised donors, name-dropped partners, and painted futures with rented words. "We shoulder every obligation," he said, letting the sentence linger in air. It skimmed past the line of policy like a boat against a buoy. Mia wrote one word on her card, then capped her pen. "Anchor," it read, and she slid it toward the MC. The MC nodded and tapped his script twice, setting his pace. Victor's phone buzzed once. Controller ready, documents queued, restraint still first. I sipped water and tasted the clean edge of approaching truth. Dessert cleared, and the room settled into that patient hush. The MC stepped up, voice level, presence warm. Before our closing vision, he said, a word of thanks. He read the line exactly, each syllable balanced like a beam. This evening is made possible by our sponsors and an anonymous benefactor who ensured every obligation was honored. The words moved across the room like a tide that didn't need noise. Palms met tables, eyes found each other, a few heads tilted. Trevor's smile held, but the corners tightened by a fraction. He leaned toward the mic with a practiced laugh. And of course, he began, our foundation. The MC lifted a hand gently. We'll return to Mr. Langford in a moment, he said. First, gratitude to the crews who built this night. Applause rose, honest and unscripted, for people without press releases. Renee's team bowed their heads and kept moving. The AV lead lifted a hand once, then returned to his board. Mia exhaled like someone closing a cabinet quietly. Victor's shoulders lowered a notch, policy holding without force. Brooks squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, window open. I nodded and kept my face neutral, because dignity does its work best in silence. Trevor adjusted his cuff like he needed control to find a wrist. The switch was set, and the room now held the truth like a level. It would not tilt back. The lights dimmed just enough to draw focus toward the stage. Silver reflected off glass, the kind of glow that makes rooms seem richer than they are. The MC stood center, calm, professional, voice firm. Tonight, he said, we celebrate generosity in every form, spoken, written, and silent. It was the first cue, and he delivered it perfectly. Trevor sat 2 tables away, posture sharp, smile tight. He didn't clap when others did. He waited for eyes to swing his way. I'd seen that stance before, a man rehearsing dominance through stillness. Mia moved along the back row, checking sound levels while pretending not to watch him. Victor remained by the entrance, one hand resting on his folder, the one containing the escrow statement. Brooke whispered, it's starting, like we were watching a slow sunrise. The MC began reading vendor acknowledgments, moving down the list one by one. Lighting by Apex Events, catering by Renault Hospitality, venue and logistics supported by the Langford Foundation, and an anonymous benefactor whose contribution ensured all commitments were met in full. The pause after anonymous benefactor landed like a drumbeat. The audience clapped, polite, uncertain, curious. Trevor's jaw flexed once. He forced a light laugh, the kind that belongs in commercials. So mysterious, he said loudly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. But I assure everyone the Langford Foundation handles its own bills. His tone tried for humor, but wobbled near defensiveness. Mia's eyes flicked to Victor, and he gave the smallest nod, confirmation that her instincts were right. The MC smiled politely, continuing, of course, Mr. Langford's leadership is deeply appreciated. He shifted smoothly into the next section, describing the auction totals and donor milestones. The tension thinned but didn't vanish. It hovered, invisible but audible in breaths and chair creaks. Trevor kept his grin, but his knuckles pressed white against his champagne flute. Brooke leaned close and whispered, he's pretending that didn't hit. He knows it did, I murmured. He's just waiting for a spotlight to fight back. Across the room, Mia slipped a folded card beneath the lectern, the one containing the escrow acknowledgment in case Trevor forced denial. She straightened, looked toward me, and mouthed 2 words, be ready. The night's calm had reached its hinge point. Everything from here would swing on what he said next. Trevor rose from his chair like a man stepping into his own commercial. The lights caught the edge of his cufflinks, tiny suns reflecting each. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, projecting warmth that could melt only plastic. While we appreciate all this talk of benefactors, let's not be shy about where credit truly belongs. His tone carried that expensive calm people buy to hide panic. The MC froze for half a heartbeat, glancing toward Victor. Victor gave a measured nod. Proceed, but don't yield. Trevor took the pause as surrender and continued. The Langford Foundation, as always, fulfilled every commitment. We stand by excellence, integrity, and accuracy, Victor said quietly but clearly from the back of the room. Heads turned. Trevor blinked, smile flickering like a light with bad wiring. Excuse me? Victor stepped forward. Not rushed, not theatrical. You said integrity, he replied. Integrity starts with honoring agreements. His voice stayed steady, not loud, but amplified by the silence of 200 curious guests. As per hotel policy, Disclosure requires acknowledgment when benefactors participate in escrow payments. That's all we're hearing tonight. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Trevor's eyes darted to Mia, then to me. You're seriously doing this? He hissed. Mia answered evenly. We're just keeping the record straight. Trevor forced a laugh, trying to wave it off. So someone tossed in a few dollars for good press? Victor raised a hand. Every invoice cleared through that escrow. Gasps followed. Small, polite, but unmistakable. Brooke's hand gripped my wrist under the table, firm but proud. I stayed seated, steady, the way you watch a structure find its limit. Trevor swallowed, still smiling, but it no longer fit his face. Well, he said, voice cracking like dry paint, our anonymous friend should have introduced himself sooner. I stood slowly. The chairs near me scraped softly as people shifted for a better view. Anonymous doesn't mean silent, I said, calm, factual. It means someone cared more about completion than applause. The MC, sensing air returning to the room, stepped in. And that, he said warmly, is the spirit of generosity this evening was meant to celebrate. Applause followed, real, rolling, unforced. Trevor sat back down, his eyes lowered for once. The lights dimmed further, signaling the event's end. The room belonged to truth now, and Trevor finally looked small inside it. The applause thinned to a careful hush, and I felt the room change. People leaned forward, elbows barely touching linens, waiting for the next sound to tell them what to think. Trevor stared at the centerpiece like it might bloom a save. Mia stood near the lectern with that folded card, steady as a level. Victor waited by the aisle, a statue of policy with a heartbeat. Brooke touched my sleeve once and let go, trusting me to hold straight lines. I took one breath, then another, and stepped toward the microphone. Class, I decided, would sound like work getting its name back. I won't take long, I began, keeping my voice even and plain. I don't want to steal attention from the reason we showed up. I nodded toward the hospital staff at table 5, their badges tucked into jackets. But you've heard the word integrity tonight, and integrity means facts that can stand alone. I looked at Renee and the AV lead. These crews built the evening the way carpenters build roofs. Quiet, precise, and on time. The room loosened a little, the way people relax when someone names the invisible. Trevor adjusted his cuff and tried a small grin. I didn't return it, because we weren't in the same business anymore. Some of you know me, I continued, and most of you don't. A few heads nodded. Practical curiosity replacing theater. I started as a carpenter, learned to measure twice and pay people once. I don't do speeches, I do receipts. Soft laughter threaded the room, not at anyone, just at the truth. When deposits came up short, an anonymous escrow covered the gap so every invoice cleared. I let the sentence rest on the table, the way you set down a tool. It wasn't charity for applause, it was respect for labor. Brooke watched me like a nurse checking vitals and finding numbers she could trust. Trevor rose halfway, then sat, trapped by his own spotlight. Are we turning this into a personal testimonial? He asked lightly. We're celebrating community. I nodded. Exactly, I said. Community keeps promises even when one person wobbles. He tilted his head. So you're saying you're the benefactor? He pressed, a smile pulled tight. I answered without heat. I'm saying the bills were paid by someone who values completion. Murmurs moved across the room like wind in folded programs. Victor lifted the folder 1 inch. An unspoken, we can open this. Trevor's jaw worked once, and he sat back again. I turned from the stage so I could speak directly to the people working. Renee, I said, your team moved like a metronome. Thank you. She nodded, surprised and proud at once. Apex lighting, I continued, pointing gently. Your rig never flickered. You saved 3 cues tonight. The lead lifted a hand, half bow, half salute. Florals, stagehands, dishwashers, coat check, I said, naming the invisible line by line. You made elegance honest. Donors began to clap in small waves, not for me, but for the people who'd been furniture in rich rooms for years. That sound felt like air after a window opens. Mia approached the lectern and placed the folded card on top. 1 line more, she said softly, looking to the MC. He nodded and read, This evening was completed by sponsors and an anonymous benefactor who ensured integrity matched intent. He closed the card and stepped back, leaving the sentence where it belonged. Trevor stood again, voice honeyed, trying to push the tide uphill. And of course, he said, our foundation. Victor cleared his throat, not loud, just final. The record is settled, he said. We're grateful to all who honored it. The room chose the path of least resistance and clapped for the record, not the performance. I looked toward table 5, where Brooks' colleagues sat with cautious hope. Mercy General needs monitors more than speeches, I said. Here's the part that matters. I turned to Brooke. Your unit will receive the full amount promised for equipment. Then I faced the donors. If any of you plan to give based on optics, consider giving based on outcomes instead. A few faces softened, as if permission had arrived to be decent without branding. Trevor exhaled sharply, then tried for the last word. Class, he announced, is knowing how to carry a room. I shook my head once. Class, I said, is paying the people who carried it for you. The MC sensed the landing and moved cleanly into closure. On behalf of our vendors, staff, and partners, he said, thank you for supporting real work. The band eased in under his words, soft and measured. Guests stood, chairs whispering across the floor. Some came over with quick handshakes and quiet thanks. My parents ran a bakery, one man said, eyes bright. You did right. A woman in a navy dress added, about time someone said it out, and loud. I nodded and kept my answers short because the point wasn't me. Truth had the room. I was just the mic stand. Trevor drifted closer, smile gone, voice low enough to keep his brand alive. You think this helps you? He asked. You humiliated me in a room I built. I met his eyes and gave him dignity's smallest mirror. You humiliated yourself, I said. The room just got better lighting. He glanced at Victor's folder and then at Mia's calm face. You'll regret this, he tried. I shook my head. Regret belongs to debt, I said. I don't owe you anything. He stepped back, measuring me for a box I didn't live in anymore. Boxes are for display. Work lives on scaffolds and sidewalks, not pedestals. Brooke slipped beside me, relief replacing worry in her shoulders. That was clean, she said. No fire, just daylight. I told her daylight wins because darkness gets tired faster. She laughed, and the sound finally felt like the end of a shift. Mia joined us, eyes softer than I'd ever seen. Vendors are texting thank yous, she said. They'll sleep tonight. Victor shook my hand once, firm and grateful. Policy appreciates allies, he said. I answered, so does labor. The chandelier above us held steady, not a tremor in the glass. Maybe it understood. Class isn't expensive, it's paid in full. Morning headlines didn't mention my name, but they named the moment. Blogs called it the escrow correction and a rare dose of event honesty. Donors texted Mia asking for vendor contacts to tip directly. Victor reported 0 disputes and 3 early payments for future bookings. Renee messaged Brooke a photo of her crew clinking paper cups. We got asked to staff 2 corporate events, she wrote proudly. The AV lead sent a thumbs up and a single word. Respect. I walked to the diner and sat where sunlight hit the counter. The coffee tasted like closure instead of survival for once. By noon, the recoil hit Trevor exactly where Image lives. 2 brand partners postponed meetings with polite identical emails about clarity and alignment. A sponsor pulled a banner from the foundation's website without a press note. The hotel's accountant sent him a tidy statement marked, paid in full escrow. He replied demanding a correction and copied half a city. Victor answered with 2 lines of policy and silence afterward. Mia texted me a screenshot of a forum where vendors swap warnings. Avoid delays from the Langford Foundation, one post read in plain language. The rumor wasn't vicious, it was useful. Useful rumors build safer rooms faster than speeches ever will. Trevor called me that afternoon, voice tight and bright like stretched plastic. You staged a stunt, he said. You tried to make me small in my house. I kept my words slow and factual because speed favors panic. No stunt, I said. Receipts, policy, a sentence the rooms deserved. He exhaled hard, then tried another angle that sounded like charm. You want a seat at this table? He said. Say the word, and I'll make room. I looked out my window at plywood stacked for a porch repair. I build tables, I said. I don't beg chairs from people who tip them. He hung up without goodbye and sent an email instead. The email reached donors within an hour and called me an overzealous contractor. He claimed I sought personal validation under the guise of anonymity. He promised a full accounting after a scheduled audit. Victor forwarded it with a subject line that said only inaccurate. Mia replied to the thread with the escrow acknowledgment attached. She wrote, all vendor obligations cleared through anonymous donor escrow per agreement. Then she stopped typing because more words would only feed fog. Brooke read the chain after her shift and shook her head slowly. "It's like arguing with an EKG," she said. "The monitor already shows the rhythm." I told her accuracy keeps better time than anger. 2 days later, Trevor walked into the hotel unannounced, and the lobby stiffened. He asked for Victor loudly and pretended not to see me seated nearby. Victor appeared with that calm manager's use as a safety rail. "We can speak privately," Victor offered, pointing toward a meeting room. Trevor waved the idea away and turned to the desk staff watching closely. "I'd like to thank our anonymous friend with a proper press moment," he said. "We should celebrate generosity." I stood and kept my tone steady enough to hold lumber. "Generosity doesn't need your camera," I said. "It needs your silence to heal." The lobby listened like a jury without a foreman. Trevor's smile fell a few inches, exposing strain under polish. "You think donors admire you?" he asked. "They admire winners, not welders." Victor stepped between us by a careful inch and cleared his throat once. "Mr. Langford," he said, "we admire compliance and gratitude here." Mia came through the revolving door as if called by timing. She carried a slim folder and a tired patience that earned wages. "We have vendor letters," she said, handing them to Victor. They requested ongoing anonymity from public dramas. Trevor glanced at the letters and then at the front desk mirrors. He saw his reflection and didn't like the lighting anymore. He tried one last posture, softer and more human, because recoil teaches options. "I want to fix this," he said quietly. "Tell me how to stand again." I let the question sit long enough to feel honest. "Start by going small," I said. "Pay fast and talk slow for a while." He winced, like humility had sharp edges he'd forgotten to sand. "And Brooks Hospital?" he asked, tone barely above regret. "They will receive funds you promised," I answered. "No Gala required." Victor nodded once, already preparing the neutral paperwork. Mia added, "We can build a donor route that doesn't touch microphones." He looked at the lobby floor, then back to us, and his voice finally fit the room. "I owe someone an apology," he said, "preferably not on a stage." We chose a conference room with carpet that didn't echo. He sat across the table, hands folded, a picture he'd never rehearsed. Brooke arrived 10 minutes later, hair damp from a scrub cap, eyes steady. Trevor stood awkwardly, then spoke without a script or a brand. "Nurse Pike," he said, "your unit deserved better than my vanity. Aaron, you did what I should have done quietly sooner." He swallowed once and let the words settle where they landed. "I'm sorry," he finished. No qualifiers, no PR." Brooke breathed out like a pressure valve found relief. "Pay people first," she said. "We won't need you to speak so much." He nodded, color returning to a face that finally looked human. I kept my voice calm because dignity carries better that way. "You owe vendors respect going forward," I said, "and the hospital the promised sum within 5 business days." He agreed to both and asked for one small concession. "May I write a note to the crews you thanked by name?" he asked. "No cameras, just words." Mia said she would deliver them without logos attached anywhere. He nodded again, like a student finally discovering he could learn. We left the room without handshakes because some repairs travel better plain. Victor prepared the transfer forms while Mia arranged discreet deliveries. Brooke squeezed my arm and whispered, "This feels like discharge day." I smiled because I understood the metaphor perfectly. Discharge happens when the numbers match and the breath steadies. Trevor walked to the elevator and resisted one last glance at the lobby mirror. The doors closed, and for once he left without a scene. Outside, the afternoon held an ordinary brightness I always trust more. It looked like a job site on time and under budget, which is dignified. The week after the apology felt like a house after a storm, quiet with small repairs everywhere. Mia sent me a short list of vendors who'd asked for no fuss thank yous, and Victor forwarded confirmation that the hospital transfer cleared. Brooke texted a photo of the new monitor order, the kind that beeps steady instead of dramatic. "This is what matters," she wrote, and I believed her more than any press line. I drove to the diner and watched contractors argue good-naturedly about joist spacing, which always sounds like family to me. The headlines moved on, as headlines do, leaving behind the people who actually keep lights on. Trevor stayed off social feeds and answered emails like a person learning to type again. I didn't gloat because gloating burns time you could spend fixing something. I just counted how many workers got paid and how many patients would see numbers stabilize. That was the ledger I trusted, not the one with logos. Mia called about the idea we'd floated at the start of this mess. something that could outlast one evening's noise. "If you still want to trade scholarship, I found a clean path," she said, voice brisk with hope. She'd connected with a community foundation that ran small funds for people who don't have lobbyists. "We can write criteria that make sense," she continued. "Proof of apprenticeship, a tool stipend, and 1 semester of night classes." I asked what the minimum endowment looked like if we kept it practical and tight. She gave a number that didn't scare me, the cost of 1 forgettable billboard. "Let's do it," I said, feeling calm instead of heroic. "Name it for the people who taught me to measure twice." She laughed and said, "Then it's the Deke Fund, unless you object," and I didn't because my old foreman earned that line. Victor offered a quiet donation from the hotel staff pool, and Renee slipped cash across the table like gratitude that refused receipts. The circle felt small and correct. We met at the foundation office, a plain room with a flag, a copier, and 3 plants trying their best. The coordinator wore a cardigan and spoke policy like a good nurse speaks meds. Clear, exact, on schedule. "No galas," I said, signing the form that locked the purpose. "Just checks to apprentices and receipts for tools." She nodded and asked if we wanted public donor lists or private acknowledgments. "Private," I said, "and letters from recipients only if they volunteer them." Brooke leaned over my shoulder and pointed at a clause about conflicts. "This protects us from men with microphones," she said, and I smiled because the line had a face. Trevor arrived late, carrying humility like a new tool he still respected. "I'd like to contribute," he said, not looking at mirrors for once. I told him the money could come, the branding could stay home, and he agreed without flinching. "Consider it tuition," he added, and for the first time I believed him. At the first award meeting, we interviewed 3 applicants while the coordinator kept notes neat enough to frame. A 22-year-old named Lavish described saving for a framing nailer while paying rent and sending money to his dad. "I can work faster with the right tool," he said, simple as truth. A single mom named Keisha needed night classes to earn her electrician's card because daylight belonged to her kid. "I study in the car on lunch," she said, and Brooke blinked hard before she smiled. A quiet kid named Evan brought a notebook with sketches of spans no one had assigned just because he liked the math. "Wood tells the truth if you listen," he said, and I felt something old and steady in my chest. We funded all 3 because the ledger could handle it, and the city needed their hands. Afterward, Mia whispered, "This is what the ballroom pretended to be," and I nodded because pretense always loses to work. We left with paperwork that felt like good lumber, straight, sturdy, ready. Weeks later, the hotel hosted a small supplier conference with zero velvet and a lot of coffee. Victor invited vendors to talk shop about timelines and fair clauses, and I sat in the back taking notes like a rookie. Renee presented a checklist that should be taught in high school. Confirm brakes, label allergens, check shoe mats. The AV lead demonstrated a power routing trick that saves headaches and fuses. Trevor attended unannounced, took a chair near the wall, and kept quiet until questions came. "What does class look like to you now?" a florist asked, not unkindly. He looked at the cables taped clean across the floor, then at the schedule that hit its marks. "Showing up on time, paying fast, and thanking the people who carry the room," he said. The answer fit, and the room let it stand without applause because sometimes respect is silence. I walked out with a binder of better habits and the sense that gravity had friends again. Brooke and I visited the hospital storage room where the new monitors waited in boxes like steady hearts. She cut one open and checked the serial against a list because nurses don't trust hope without numbers. "You did this," she said, and I shook my head out of reflex. "We did this," she corrected and tapped the list with her pen. "Vendors, a planner with a spine, a manager with rules, and a brother who doesn't scare easy." I asked if the unit felt different now that equipment was on the way. "Lighter," she said, "like the room can breathe without someone standing on its chest." We walked past families and phones, and the hush that keeps vigil for strangers. Class didn't live here as a word. It lived as a practice, measured in pulses and checks that cleared. I thought of the chandelier, and how light means nothing if it doesn't reveal faces you should notice. On a quiet evening, I met Mia and Victor on the terrace that started it all. The city moved below us like a careful machine that still needs hands. We didn't rehash anything because the story no longer required retelling. Mia raised a paper cup. "To anonymous benefactors," she said, half smiling, And to policy with teeth, Victor added softly. I lifted my cup last. To crews who build the night, and to bills that don't blush, I said. We stood there longer than the scene required, not waiting for applause, just letting air do its job. My phone buzzed with a message from Luis, holding his new nailer, grinning like a sunrise you can frame. Beneath the photo, he wrote, I'll pay it forward when I can. That's a sentence that never needs a microphone. People think revenge is noise and broken glass. It isn't. It's the moment you balance the invoice in daylight and walk away. It's choosing correction over spectacle and building something that can't be faked. Trevor didn't lose a room. He found a mirror that finally told the truth. I didn't win a stage. I funded a toolbox and a few quiet futures. Grace is just dignity with receipts, handed over without shaking hands for cameras. And class, real class, costs exactly what you owe, paid on time to the right people. The lights from the ballroom glowed behind us, softer now, like they'd learned how to aim. If you enjoyed this story and learned something from it, give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons.